start this session of the Planning Commission. Just so you know, that clock is slow. It's not right. It is 5:30. And we'll go ahead and get started. First item up, there's no minutes from the last meeting because it was only a week ago. They aren't ready yet. The chair has nothing to report. The vice chair isn't here this evening. So how about a report of the director?
You know, since last week, I don't have anything new to give you an update on.
Well, thank you. Next on the agenda is our 10-minute of discussion time. Are there any issues that anybody wants to bring up at this time? Something we should do or not do, or? Okay. I've had some discussion with staff, and we have, I hope everybody read the memo in the Dropbox. And I think I need a motion for a closed session so we can discuss that with legal staff.
I'll make that motion that we move into a closed session.
I'll second.
You need to state the reason to go into a closed session. It would
I
be-
asked Maureen that, and she said I didn't have to.
Sorry.
Legal,
Sorry.
no, legal
Listen,
advice.
we haven't done one of these for a long time.
I've
The
never
ma-
done one.
the
I move
microphones are
that
loud
we
tonight.
They
move
are
into
loud.
I make a motion that we move into a closed session for some legal counsel.
I will second that.
Okay, I have a motion by Amy Berry and a second by Brenda. Commissioner Paredes,
I vote yes.
Commissioner De Oliveira,
Yes.
Commissioner Shear,
Yes.
Commissioner Berry,
Yes.
Commissioner Tuttle,
Yes.
Commissioner Gale.
Yes.
And the chair will also vote yes. So that motion passes. We're going to have a closed session, so all of the audience will have to leave the room temporarily. So go hang out in the hall, and we'll bring you back when we're ready to have you back.
We need to take a short break so that I can handle the recording.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
Thank you.
let us know when you're ready. now come back to the public portion of the meeting. We have unfinished business left from last week for case number PLN PCM, 2022-00750. Grant, would you come up and give us the new information?
Yes, absolutely. All right. Thank you so much. Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Grant Amon, and as was stated, I am continuing the Big D headquarters conditional use petition that was heard before the Commission during the March 8th meeting earlier this month. The item was tabled during that March 8th meeting, as you know. Tonight, the proposal remains the same as it was during that meeting, and it is as follows. Oh, shoot. Should I start at which one? This one? Yep. Cool. Okay. The proposed Big D headquarters expansion requires conditional use approval to construct a 3-story addition to the existing office building located at 404 West, 400 South. The addition would develop the building's current parking lot and vehicle access. The lot is located in the D3 zoning district. The conditional use in question will be an expansion of the existing legal use, but will not include residential space. The D3 zone states that commercial/office uses in buildings of 3 stories or more without multifamily dwellings shall be allowed only as a conditional use, and then only when the applicant has demonstrated that the proposed location is not suitable for multifamily residential use. Upon further review from staff, it is determined that this standard was adopted in 1995 at a time when the state definition for conditional use was different than it currently is, and therefore the standard may not be appropriate to apply, following the changes to the state code in 2005 that altered the definition of a conditional use. It should also be noted that the section of code would be removed if City Council passes the Downtown Building Heights and Street Activation Text Amendment that were already recommended for approval by Planning Commission during the August 24th, 2022 Planning Commission meeting. This petition and presentation is specifically regarding use, and any modifications to design standards will be handled at another time or meeting. Regarding comments, since the last meeting, staff has received 1 email in support of the request. Recommendations. After re-reviewing the proposal, staff recommends that the Planning Commission approve the conditional use request as proposed. And with that, this concludes my presentation, and I am happy to take any questions at this time. David Brems, representing the applicant, is also here and has prepared to address you as well.
Does the applicant want to make a statement?
Not necessarily. You've heard my presentation. Commissioner Scheer was not here. If you want me to make a brief summary of that, I can.
I believe she's indicated she's studied up on that, so I think we're
I'll
on
try
a
to
par.
answer any questions you have.
Okay, so you're available for questions, so is there some discussion with the commission?
Yes, I would like to say that in consideration of this application for a conditional use, I think, after receiving information from council, that we should disregard, let me see what it is, Ordinance 21A.30.041, subsection C, subsection 3, as the required demonstration of suitability is a subjective standard that is not in keeping necessarily with state statutes. So I would suggest we disregard that requirement.
For
Thank
clarity,
you.
it's 040.
Thank you.
There's no other discussion. I'm willing to make a motion.
Go ahead.
That was already closed. Public hearing was already closed. So, based on the information presented and the discussion tonight and the previous meeting, I move that the commission approve this application based on staff's recommendation with the following modifications: that the current design standards are applicable that pertain to parking structure screening.
I'll second.
We have a motion by Commissioner Berry and a second by Commissioner De Oliveira. Commissioner
May-
Paredes, huh?
May I ask for some clarification? Can
Sure.
you state that modification again?
That the current design standards for parking structure screening be applied.
And they apply anyway, right?
Application had something different than current design standards for that. So
Okay.
my additional criteria is that current design standards be applied to the screening for the parking structure.
Is that part of the decision in front of us in terms of a positive, recommending a positive recommendation to the city council on this?
So this is
This is
this is
not-
the commission
Conditional
approving.
use.
This is a
yeah.
conditional use.
There's
Where
no-
the
That's a
decision
Oh, I
makers-
see. So is that part of what that's not part of a design review process later?
I don't think we're dealing with the design on this. Let me just ask a question in the motion, as to the motion. Do you, Commissioner Baird, do you find that that there are any detrimental impacts that are presented by this proposal?
Yes, the screening that was proposed in March 9th presents, I think, an issue regarding visibility, because it was like
Okay.
fake greenery.
So your motion
Without the
is to
standards in
approve
front of me
this.
that were there.
So the detrimental impact deals with screening of the parking structure.
The proposed screening of the parking structure I felt was a detrimental impact, and so my additional condition was to apply current design standards that are in code to the screening of the parking structure, so that it meets what our codes are.
So I think my question is, without that modification, there's not that requirement?
What?
So that requirement doesn't exist outside of having this modification on your motion? Is that the correct interpretation?
I don't really follow.
If
what
it's
you're
already
saying.
part of our code, I'm saying, isn't that already required?
No.
It's part of our code, but it wouldn't be required
wouldn't be
because this is a
required.
conditional use and it's not required for a conditional use. But since it's a detrimental impact, we might
she can apply
find
it.
that it's as a
Thank
group,
you.
we might find it's a detrimental impact and apply a standard for that which happens to already exist, so we'll use that one. Isn't that,
It already exists, but
Yeah.
it's not in the code.
it's
is
a
in the code.
design standard.
It's in the design standard code.
Sorry, this is for my own education, but the design standard code does not apply to conditional use permits.
I'll let legal counsel answer that.
I think this is more of a
A Nick question?
a Nick code question. Yeah, I'm not sure how the design standards that you're talking about apply in this conditional use. I'm understanding.
Because,
I'm
okay,
I'm understanding the detrimental impact. It's the application of certain design standards.
okay,
is how that
because
would-
I don't want to create design standards when there already are some on the books. We already have a way in our in our ordinance of how we deal with this particular issue of a parking structure and its screening. And so I don't want to create something new, but I want those design standards that we already have to be applied to mitigate what I see as a detrimental impact with what was in the application of their treatment for that.
Can I suggest that you consider amending that motion to reference the parking garage or structure design standards identified in City Code Section 21A 44060 A15, so that we know what's being
21A
talked
what?
about?
I think you need to repeat that
It's
citation.
21A 44060 A15.
8 as in the number 8?
A has an apple.
A15?
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
You can do it, Amy. Come on.
I know, let me get back to this. So I'll start over. Based on the information presented and the discussion, I move that the commission approve this application based on staff recommendations with the following modifications, in that the parking structure be subject to the current design standards in 21A-44060-A15.
I second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? Okay. Commissioner Paredes,
I will vote yes.
Commissioner De Oliveira,
Yes.
Commissioner Shear,
Yes.
Commissioner Berry,
Yes.
Commissioner Tuttle,
Yes.
Commissioner Gale,
Yes.
and the chair will also vote yes. So we'll approve that conditional use. Thank you.
Thanks, Commissioners.
Thank you, Grant. Okay, we'll move on to the portion of the meeting where we have public hearings. Our first item up is a plan development for Platform 1500 at approximately 1512 South, 300 West. Case number PLN PCM 2022-01154. We got the team, Cassie and Megan.
Good evening. My name is Cassie Younger. I'm here to present Platform 1500, their plan development, which we discussed at a work session a few weeks ago. So just to refresh your memories on the project description, this project is located at 1500 South and 300 West within the general commercial zone. It's offering 60 affordable housing units and 42 parking stalls on the ground floor. Their plan development request, as they are allowed to request modifications from zoning, are reduced setbacks, 0 on the corner side yards being 1500 South and Andrew Ave, and a 2.5-foot setback on 300 West. The rear would be 2.8 feet on the rear yard. On March 8th, you all had a work session to discuss this item and provided your input and feedback on the project and recommended the following changes: to provide staggered landscaping in between the parking stalls on Andrew Ave and 1500 South to increase the overall landscaping percentage, to add a sidewalk along Andrew Ave, to change out the landscaping for more water-wise planting or xeriscape, to add structural elements to add year-round interest instead of just green landscaping, a rendering of the second floor patio space, and a lighting plan. So the applicant did provide all of these items that you recommended, and I'll go through them street by street. So on 300 West, they kept their proposed design of a mural and glass facade along the lobby and leasing area. They extended the mural around the corner. They reduced the density of landscaping, but still provided the varying sizes of planter boxes along this facade, and kept in line with SEPTED principles as you recommended with that police review. They're adding a structural element instead of trees in between the glass and the mural in order to keep that year-round visual interest, so it won't go dead in the winter. On 1500 South, they added murals to the previously blank concrete walls and then added these wood elements in front of the metal fencing just to soften that somewhat harsh look of just the blank metal fencing, and then switched out all of the landscaping for a xeriscape and added boulders and gravel for a more water-friendly approach. On Andrew Ave, they mimicked the same design as 1500 South, so they added these landscaping triangles in between the parking stalls, the wood accents, and boulders and xeriscaping, and they did end up adding a 5-foot sidewalk with a 2.5-foot curb and gutter to this street. As was discussed last time, this right-of-way on Andrew Ave is very narrow, so there was no room for a park strip, just straight up sidewalk against the building, which is a 0 setback. So this is a rendering of their second floor patio area. You can see they're providing a lot of greenery, some pergolas, and an open space, common gathering area for all the residents. And then the plan development standards, which we went through last time, I'll just highlight the ones that were of concern at the work session. So this project does meet the plan development objectives. They are providing 100% of their units at an affordable housing rate with a target AMI of 43%. So this meets the objective and the purpose statement of the plan development. This is within the ballpark area master plan. So the ballpark goals and strategies of this area include to increase affordability and attainability of housing, to improve safety, to improve the connectivity and pedestrian and biking environment, and to enhance the neighborhood green space. We feel that this project does add to all of these goals and strategies based on their redesign. So in regards to the improving safety that's mentioned in the ballpark area plan, the Planning Commission wanted to see a lighting plan, so this is what was provided. This is along 1500 South, the north elevation, and the south is on Andrew Ave. So it does have these sconce lightings across the walkway. And then it's a little hard to see in this photo, but there is ceiling lights above all the fenced landscaped areas as well. So like in between each landscaping area. As for the design and compatibility of the project, here again are some renderings of nearby projects that are coming very soon in the area. And we do feel like this fits the compatibility of the neighborhood as it rapidly continues to redevelop. The landscaping, while it is not as much as would be provided with standard zoning, we do feel like the applicant really tried their best to squeeze as much landscaping in to every single nook and cranny of this project as possible. And they are re-landscaping the park strips on 1500 South and 300 West. And these trees will be changed out to match the overall design of the reconstruction on 300 West. So 300 West has an overall consistent feel in the landscaping. So in terms of mobility, this sidewalk was added on Andrew Ave to enhance that pedestrian connectivity that was desired in the ballpark area plan. They are also adding, or sorry, not adding, but they have provided bike parking and storage within the building, and this project is located within a half a mile of the ballpark track station. So based on all these changes that the applicant provided in their design, staff is recommending approval of this project, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
That was loud.
Is
Is
there-
your applicant here?
I believe he is, yes.
Do they want to come up and add anything? You don't have to if you don't want to, but. Okay, why don't you come up anyway in case the commission has questions for you? And just state your name for the record in the mic, and
I'm Thomas Lee. Good to see everybody again. It's nice to be here.
thank you.
Excellent job.
Commission, do you have any questions? I think Brenda does.
I apparently missed the March 8th meeting where so many interesting things happened, but in this one as well. So I just have one question, which is there seems to be kind of a rear patio in this very far to the west. Is that also landscaped in the same way as the central patio?
There's not a rear patio. It's just a center patio. We do have a second amenity patio that's in the northeast corner at the very top of the building.
Okay, so what is the paved area above the parking garage in the very western edge of the property?
There is a protrusion of some concrete for the patio space, but that's private patios for the residences that are just facing that section.
Okay, that's the area I'm talking about. So is there a landscape intention for those as well?
No, they're just private balconies for those individuals, similar to the balconies above, but those residences will get a little bit bigger of a balcony since the patio is bigger.
Yeah, the patio's quite large actually, so it would seem to me that that's some place where you could also add landscape amenities that would, or trees. So we'll talk about that later.
Okay, anyone else have questions? Okay, seeing none here, we'll open the public hearing on this item. Is there anyone from the Community Council who would like to speak? I do have one card, and unfortunately, I can't read his writing very well. Dave? Okay, go up to the microphone. You'll have 2 minutes. State your name for the record.
I'm David Boyer from Precision Appliance on the corner of 15th South and 3rd West. Parking in that neighborhood is just going to get atrocious in the next year. So I'm curious, are you making any allowances for street parking? Because you've got 400 apartments going on behind the car wash. There's another 400 apartments going in down by the tire place eventually. And there's another huge development going on Andrew. So I look at, we've got 1,000 apartments coming up in a 3-block area in the next 3 years. Where are they all gonna park? Where is my business gonna park?
Okay, we'll ask staff when we're done.
I'm sorry, what?
I said, we'll let the staff address that
Okay.
when we get back to them. Is there anyone else in the audience who would like to speak on this item? Seeing no one, I will close the public hearing and bring it back to the commission. And I guess we should ask staff and the designer, do you have any answer for the parking question?
Yeah, I can answer that. So the Whitney apartments that are going in, they actually followed the standards for development without asking for a plan development for the zone. So they're parked and meeting the parking standards. A lot of their parking for the Whitney apartments is going to be surface parking. This project's parking will meet the standard, or does meet the parking standards. 1500 South will remain unaltered, and that allows for on-street parking. So that will remain. Andrew Avenue will become no parking just because of the right-of-way width that we have. The cross-section for that is going to be 5-foot sidewalks on both sides, 2.5 feet gutter, and 18-foot right-of-way, or asphalt. So there's not going to be a lot of room on Andrew. But 1500 South, that parking will remain unchanged, and Whitney will be surface level. And then the project going to the south is also going to have to meet the parking standards, and that's going through a design review. So that will come later.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for staff, the applicant?
I would like to make a motion.
Thank you. Commissioner De Oliveira?
All right, based on the findings listed in the staff report, the information presented, and the input received during the public hearing, I move that the Planning Commission approve the plan development petition PLN PCM 2022-01154 as proposed, subject to complying with the conditions listed in the staff report.
I second. That was me.
You, okay. I have a motion from Commissioner De Oliveira and a second from Commissioner Gale. We'll start with Commissioner Gale.
Yes.
Commissioner Tuttle.
Yes.
Commissioner Berry.
Yes.
Commissioner Shearer.
Yes.
Commissioner De Oliveira.
Yes.
Commissioner Paredes.
I will vote yes.
And the chair will also vote yes. You got approved. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. We're very excited. Nice to see everybody again.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll move on to our second item, a zoning map amendment at 924 West, 200 North, case number PLN PCM 2022-01142. We have Riley.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, so can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. This is a request to rezone property at 924 West, 200 North from the R1 5000 single-family residential zone to the RMF 30 low-density multifamily residential zone. Staff's recommendation to the Planning Commission is to forward a positive recommendation to the City Council for this request. This is a zoning map of the property and the surrounding area. The block is zoned R1 5000 and is composed of primarily single-family residential homes. And this trend continues to the north with lower density single-family residential. To the east is a block composed of R1 7000 and a recently developed mid-block area that was rezoned to the SR3 zone in anticipation of the Hoyts Place development. North Temple Boulevard is located 1 block south of the property, and approaching this road is a variety of higher residential density and mixed-use zones, including the TSA zone, SR1, and some patches of R1 5000 and institutional. Here are some site photos that I took at my site visit to this property. The top image is an aerial image showing the context of the block. And on the far right is an image of the front of the property. On the far left is an image of the rear of the property, showing a portion of that vacant mid-block area. And the middle bottom image is a view from that rear of the property looking west. So there are 2 key considerations for this proposal that I will discuss during this presentation and that are also discussed in the staff report. The first is the proposal's relation to the North Temple Boulevard Master Plan, and the second is discussion on neighborhood compatibility. This area is subject to the North Temple Boulevard Master Plan, and the general intent of this plan is to transform areas near North Temple Boulevard into an environment of walkable communities with a diverse mix of uses and housing types. Different goals were identified for nearby neighborhoods in this plan, including the Jackson neighborhood where this property is located. Areas expanding from North Temple Boulevard were classified as core, transitional, or stable areas, which is shown on this image on the left. This particular property is designated as a stable area, which is described as an area where little change is expected or desired, or where the current zoning allows for the desired future land uses. Sorry. So this plan also specifically marks this block and the neighboring block to the east as blocks that have opportunities for infill development. The block to the east has already seized this opportunity by rezoning the mid-block area for a new residential development. Infill development may apply to vacant areas or areas within the block that are underutilized or underdeveloped. As this area is described as a stable area, the zoning regulations should be aimed at maintaining existing development characteristics of this neighborhood. Thank you. Excuse me, just 1 second. Okay, I will start that sentence over. As this area is described as a stable area, the zoning regulations should be aimed at maintaining existing development characteristics of this neighborhood while allowing appropriately scaled development in the designated areas. Any changes made should be small and development consistent with the form and features of surrounding structures. The RMF 30 low-density multifamily residential zone allows and supports various residential housing types that are small scale in nature and desires to maintain the existing physical characteristics of established residential neighborhoods. Therefore, the RMF 30 zone is suitable in supporting the objectives of the North Temple Boulevard Master Plan. This slide shows the purpose statements of the RMF 30 zone. The phrases that are in bold highlight things in this purpose statement that align with the North Temple Boulevard Master Plan. And I will just read it real quick. The purpose of the RMF 30 low-density multifamily residential district is to provide area in the city for various multifamily housing types that are small-scale in nature and that provide a transition between single-family housing and larger multifamily housing developments. The primary intent of the district is to maintain the existing physical character of established residential neighborhoods in the city, while allowing for incremental growth through the integration of small-scale multifamily building types. The standards for the district are intended to promote new development that is compatible in mass and scale with existing structures in these areas, along with a variety of housing options. This district reinforces the walkable nature of multifamily neighborhoods, support adjacent neighborhoods serving commercial uses, and promotes alternative transportation modes. So, moving on to neighborhood compatibility and impact. I have included these two tables that are also within your staff report. The table on the left compares the different uses that are allowed in the R1 5000 zone in comparison to the RMF 30 zone. The table on the right shows the different development standards between the two zones. So, within the R1 5000 zone, it's primarily a single-family residential zone, and that's the use that is permitted. Within the RMF 30 zone, a variety of housing types are permitted, including single-family residential, two-family, multifamily, and row houses. So for the zoning standards for both of these zones, there's a lot of similarities and a few differences between these zones. So they are very similar when it comes to standards regulating maximum height, setbacks, and lot coverage. The main differences between these two zones have to do with lot area per dwelling unit and then also with lot width. And that's what allows for the higher density within the RMF 30 zone. The RMF 30 zone also includes design standards, and this is something that is somewhat unique to this zone. A lot of our low-density residential zones don't include design standards, and these include standards for building materials, glass, blank walls, and entry features. So all of these design standards increase compatibility with new development in the zone with existing nearby structures and the existing neighborhood as a whole. These are the standards of approval, and I wanted to include these in the presentation to draw attention to what staff and the Planning Commission uses to analyze any proposed rezone. So staff has gone through each of these at length and has determined that the proposal does address each of these standards adequately, and that's what our recommendation of approval is based on. Lastly, I wanted to go over some public comment and concerns that we have received for this proposal. This is a chart that breaks down these concerns. It identifies the types of concerns and compares the frequency of each concern in relation to all concerns. So the number one most received concern was that there are already too many people in Salt Lake City and this area. The second most received concern was concerns about traffic and parking, and the third most received concern was about crime. The commission may notice that this chart is slightly different than the one that is included in the staff report, and that is because public comment received up until noon today was taken into account with this chart, whereas the chart in your staff report only includes public comment up until the day that the staff report was published, which was last Thursday. So all comment that has been received has been noted and appreciated, and the ones that were received prior to the publication of the staff report are included in the staff report, and the ones that we have received after publication of the staff report has been sent to the Planning Commission. So in conclusion, based on the information and findings listed in the staff report, it is planning staff's opinion that the request does meet the applicable standards of approval and therefore recommends that the Planning Commission forward a positive recommendation onto the City Council for consideration. And that concludes my presentation, and I am happy to take any questions from the commission.
Is your applicant here? Want to come up and state your name for the record? Do you have any presentation you'd like to make?
My name is Jordan Atkin. I'm with TAG SLC, the applicant. We don't have a formal presentation.
Okay, but you're available for questions.
Yeah, we'll just say we were involved in the one of the first roundtable discussions about the RMF 30 zone way back in, I believe, 2018. So we're excited that a new zone for this infill missing middle type development has been brought forward. And one of the things that we particularly advocated for was smaller differential between single-family detached and attached dwellings, which did get passed, and it's 2,000 square feet per dwelling. It wasn't noted here, but it is in the staff report that we are desirous to build a single-family detached project here. And so happy to answer any other questions.
Okay, does the commission have any questions at this time?
I have one.
Go
So
ahead,
Jordan,
Commissioner
if your proposal is to do detached zones, and why do you need RMF 30 if the main difference between that is the RMF 30 would allow for like two-family, eightplexes, so, or with row houses, so why do you need to go at RMF 30?
The two primary differences, my understanding is the R15 zone that exists allows us to do 28 feet if you have a pitched roof, which basically limits you to 2 stories. By being able to go to RMF 30, that 2 feet relatively inconsequential with how you view a building, but allows us to stack another story on top, which really helps when you consider needing to park two cars, so you kind of can just stack your area. The other one is the difference between a 2,000 square foot lot area within RMF and 5,000. So in this proposal, it's 8 single-family homes versus 4, which would be allowed with the R15.
Have you made any consideration of preserving the existing home and then building behind it?
We did.
Because that existing home is pretty big.
It is. Our initial conversation with the fire marshal seemed like there would be some challenges with how to actually facilitate that with the distance between the building and the property line. There's no real way to get back there.
When I was looking at the aerial, was there a alleyway? There used to be an alleyway at the that circle to the north?
Yes. So
is it on paper or has it been vacated?
No, it is existing. There's a private alley that borders the northern and eastern property lines. The setback here for the single-family home is a lot narrower than it looks, which is also why they are considering demolishing the home to allow access to the rear of the property.
I guess I didn't really follow that. So, I mean, that alleyway could be then also another access point into this property for those homes.
So they are both private alleys, and the applicant would have to determine whether or not they could access them. I am not sure yet whether they have access by right to either of those alleys at this point.
Because I think that's an important facet to any developing this long lot, to have an additional access point that, you know, may be a consideration for saving that existing home, but also just then to alleviating some traffic flow, different access points. So I think that would be something I'd like to know.
I think it's worth noting our understanding of the alleyway to the east is that it's a full 33 feet wide. So it's massive, and it almost could act like a street itself. But we would have to dive in further. I don't know if we could access the rear over a private if fire would accept accessing the rear of the property with over a private drive like that, private alley.
True, I don't have the answer to that either, but I think that's a worthwhile question.
Any other questions for the applicant?
Just have a clarification. When I went by that house, I thought I saw a for sale sign on the property?
Yeah.
Are you the owner, or the new owner representing the new owner, or is the owner selling the property?
We're currently representing the existing owner of the property.
But it's up for sale?
Yes. Our firm is in contract to purchase the property as well, but we do not own it.
Anyone else at this time? Okay, we will open the public, just stay put up here, and we'll open the public hearing. Is there anyone from the community council who wishes to speak? Okay, seeing no one, I have cards from a number of people here. You have to wait, okay? Are you? Okay, then you can come up. I can do that, but I need you to go to the microphone because it has to be on the record. Okay, so I have a number of cards from people who filled them out. The first one is Bill Watts. So I need you to go up to the microphone, state your name for the record, and you'll have 2 minutes.
Thanks, everybody, for taking some time to listen to us. As you know, that there's...
And your name is?
William Watts.
Thank you.
Thank you. I hate speaking to microphones, though. Here, we'll do this. All right.
Okay, that's good.
So one thing, I want to start off with the alley. The alley is not accessed by that property. If you look at the warranty deed, it is not stated in the warranty deed for that property to access any of the alleys on the east or north side of that property. So there's no egress from that property aside from a driveway that goes from north to south as per their map. Warranty deed, there we go. The other thing is spot zoning. The spot zoning that we're seeing is hacking up our neighborhoods. And as I have spoken to many of neighbors in my neighborhood, the concern is that this is going to spread, and it is spreading, as we see. With the current zoning that we have, they could put a house behind it, to my understanding, and let that be that. But it's not about that. It's about more revenue instead of community. Now, every neighbor that we have surrounding that property is against this. There's many neighbors here today, and many that have submitted comments during the process. I have not met one person that has said, yes, let's do this, keep it going. It's, no, we do not want this. If you look at the map, in addition to that, if you look at the map, the old Rite Aid that used to be there, that has been demolished, and now a 6-story building is being put in there. So we run into issues with parking. We run into issues with no street light on that corner. It's going to be a mess altogether. In addition to that, we're running into a food desert. So these are things that we have to think about as a neighborhood, and I have to think about that for my family as well as my neighbors surrounding. So if we keep on doing this, we're not going to have any food or any gas.
And that's your time.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Appreciate it, everybody.
I would just ask that anybody in the public who has their phone on, please put that on silent.
This one's me. No. Oh, there was somebody out there. Okay. Chase War? Do you want to speak, or do you want me to read your card? Yes. Go up to the microphone, state your name for the record, and you said you're on the community council? You're the chair of the community council?
I'm vice chair, but I'm not
Okay.
going to speak as vice chair. We just talked, and I'd like to talk to our chair before I speak formally.
Okay, so you'll have 2 minutes.
Okay. I want to address not just this project, but others in regards to, as Bill said, spot zoning. I live in the oldest home that has been continuously lived in the state of Utah, the Nelson Wheeler Whipple House. It's located in the Guadalupe neighborhood. It's also in a TSA zone. I think that those neighborhoods in that area are extremely vulnerable to stuff like this. We're seeing high density, less parking, and less resources available to the residents living in these areas. I think that in the past we've mentioned, and I know our Fair Park Community Council has mentioned, that we would love to push for a moratorium, not necessarily on building or approving further developments, but on rezoning properties just like this. I think that the city, the planning commission has put the cart before the horse in a lot of situations where you guys are pressed, and I know you guys are all smart individuals and you're here for a reason, and I don't envy your job, but that you guys are pressed to push forward with some permits, and I think that the city really needs to step back and look at the lasting effects on the neighborhoods in these areas especially. So I want you to maybe table this or vote no on this now so that you guys can get caught up and realize the lasting effects that are happening to so many of these neighborhoods on the west side. Thanks.
Thank you. My next card is Elizabeth Hawk. State your name for the record, and you'll have 2 minutes.
Thank you. My name is Elizabeth Hawk. I'm a property owner on 9th West and 221 North. Myself, as well as the surrounding neighbors, are a definite no on this rezoning. There's no access through the alley. It is a private alley, and it would disrupt so much of the community with the building and everything else, and with only the one access that they're planning on doing for this property, I just don't understand how they plan on doing that. Even though, yes, that property is a very large lot, everybody that lives on 9th West that's adjacent, that uses that alley, I use that alley every single day coming and going from work. And there's no way that for myself and any of the other members that live on that, that live right there, it would not work. We are all a definite no on this rezoning.
Thank you. Montana Fresham? Come up and speak. State your name for the record. Oh, you do? I can read this. Would you like me to read that? Okay, Montana has a card here. She said the outline proposal will gentrify our neighborhood. I'm not interested in having real estate investors and Silicon Valley Airbnb hosts for neighbors until or unless the proposed is amended to explain these properties will be affordable for young families and working class individuals in a state that has not passed minimum wage in 15 years, raised minimum wage in 15 years. I strongly oppose. Being Note District, affordable high-density housing, our neighborhood is underutilized, but we need solutions sized for the people who live here. Este barrio no se vende. This neighborhood's not for sale. Thank you. Joshua Dunn. Do you want me to read your card, or do you want to come up and speak? Will you please state your name for the record, and you'll have 2 minutes.
Okay. Yeah, I'm Joshua Dunn. I agree with what the other neighbors have said. I think that the alleyway just really would not work for back access. We have a gate that faces that alleyway, and it's been broken by someone who has tried to maneuver around it. So it would really be, like, I understand the desire to add more houses back there because it's really just half the lot is empty. But I think that it's just too many houses, and it's really important to make sure that it's going to be affordable. That's all.
Thank you. And then the last card I have is from Michelle Watts. And please state your name for the record, and you'll have 2 minutes.
Hi, thank you. My name is Michelle Watts. I just want to jump right into the North Temple Boulevard Master Plan, page 51. There are 3 distinctive areas: core, transitional, and stable. The stable areas are those properties that have well-established land uses and are an asset to the station area are likely to see minor development pressures. Page 52, minor changes happen within the existing development pattern and are consistent with the overall scale of the surrounding structures. Block 69 has 56 homes and maybe 5 of those are 2 stories tall. All the rest are single-family, one-level living. Page 53, as you guys saw, parcels in blue are stable areas where little change is expected or desired and where the current zoning allows for the desired future land use and intensities. This rezone goes against any applicable comprehensive plan for our area. If a proposed zoning change is not consistent with the comprehensive plan, the application should be denied. There's sufficient land elsewhere for RMF 30, and the fact that TAG wants to develop one specific piece of property is not enough to justify a rezone. TAG may build by right. It's their problem that a single-family home will not meet their ROI. This zoning change is not consistent with the orderly development of the public services on our block. This zoning change will significantly impact traffic, being a one-way in and a one-way out. That alley is 100% private and none of the neighbors want this. There's no light or crosswalk. We demand a traffic study once the 397 apartments unit is built kitty corner from the applicant's project. It is offensive to our community that TAG suggests their project will make those 397 new neighbors feel welcome. What about the other existing 100 of us on our block? Development is very complicated. I'm not saying no to investing or developing the west side, but this is too much right now. We're a buffer block holding the line of the density from North Temple. Please consider housing loss mitigation if we continue to allow spot zonings. This definitely affects us all. I'm a homeowner who shares a property line with this project, and it should be denied. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the audience who wishes to speak on this item? Go up, state your name. Stop that. State your name for the record, and you'll have 2 minutes.
Hi, I'm Chris Chrysostom. I'm the homeowner immediately to the west of the proposed property or rezone here. I actually wrote a letter, so I already have one set of comments already out about this. I do oppose the rezone, but the next comment I wanted to make is more of on a personal level. This is more of a question for the overall development that's going to take place there. The property next to mine is very narrow, so I have a big question about privacy for my property. And I would like to know, or I'd like to see what kind of privacy mitigation is going to be going on to, assist with, with our way of living in the property immediately to the west. That's really it.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak on this item? Step up, state your name for the record, and you'll have 2 minutes.
My name is Roy Luker. I just want to make a comment concerning an old Aesop's fable about the camel and his nose in the tent. He kept asking to be allowed in the tent. The man wouldn't let him in. He says, how about my nose? And how about my head? How about my front leg? And before long, the camel was in the tent. The owner was out of the tent. This is the nose of the camel in our neighborhood. 200 North is the borderline right now between these huge, monstrous buildings that are going up all around us and civilized single-family homes that have been around for a century. I say, let's not let that camel get his nose in the tent. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, I will close.
Chair Bachman, I actually have 2 emails to read that came in after 5 o'clock. This first one is from Kiko Jones, who's a resident in the neighborhood. It says, due to other obligations, I won't be able to make it tonight, so hopefully you can read this into the record. I'm summarizing that part, and we'll get to the meat of it. This is the meat of her email. Another spot rezoning from R1 to RMF in the middle of a single-family neighborhood. One property owner wants to change the zoning for his property so that he can sell it to a developer for a lot of money. Soon another property owner wants to do the same, and another and another. Before long, the master plan would lose its value and meaning completely because R1 would turn into RMF one by one. And what a shame for the city to even be considering accepting such a lazy way of changing the master plan without looking at a bigger picture under a lame excuse, we need more housing, in quotes. No consideration or plans for congestion of traffic, parking, or safety of the neighborhood. Have you been working on a new master plan? Where are you with it? City planning shouldn't be the whole bunch of reactions to what's on your nose. You need an ability to see further than a few inches. I am against spot rezoning. By allowing spot rezoning, you are selling out our city to developers one property at a time. And then the second email is from Joe Ekman Crum, to whom it may concern. There have been many requests for development in our neighborhood among all of the development already happening throughout the city and our immediate area. I am very much against any more density right next to me and my family. One, safety. Crime has become way more of an issue surrounding my house since Pioneer Park was shut down. Just last week, I called 911 about a gunshot at 3 a.m. while I was getting ready for work. 2, ownership/pride. I have lived at my house for 20 years and have had every intention of it being my last house. I have friends that have worked on many houses in the neighborhood with the dream of improving one house at a time, one block at a time. When multifamily units come into our immediate area, the overall drive to improve the neighborhood drops due to lack of ownership. Renters take over houses that have been established by families that have grown up in the area, and the broken window theory becomes the new reality. What do you see your immediate neighborhood looking like in 10 years or 15 years? 3, environment. Apartment buildings are breaking ground all around us. Wouldn't it be prudent to see how that is going to affect our traffic, electric, water, schools, accommodations for children, living environment for elderly that have lived their whole life in our neighborhood and have had dreams of passing their home down to their family? I beg of you, please do not drive the good folk out of our neighborhood to be replaced by people who only care of quantity and not quality. Thank you for your time.
Is that all?
Yep.
Okay. Now I will close the public hearing on this and bring it back to the commission for discussion. Questions for the applicant or staff?
I have a question for staff. This property you say is 0.5 acres. How many residential units could be built under it, single-family units could be built without a zone change?
Without a zone change, 4 single-family residences could be built.
Okay, thank you. I was opposed to this project, and then I went out to the site and I noticed what is probably the strongest argument for it, which is the historic development across the street from it. If you'll look at the actual map with the property lines on it, there is a sort of interblock alleyway that's very common in these very large blocks. Hoyt Place is one of them, and this is called Loxie Street or something like that. Anyway, it has about 7 houses going internal into the block along a narrow street on one side. And this is a typology, I think, that provides some sense of affordability. However, I would rather see this property developed in conjunction with the alleyway so that the existing home could be maintained and the frontage of the street have a neighborhood feel to it, and the additional units, which it clearly could handle, having some access, alternative access, rather than coming on 200 North. I'm not sure that's possible, but I am also of the opinion that this block does present a kind of wall, in a sense, of protection or buffer zone for the other residential areas, neighborhoods in this area. And so I would be opposed to a spot zoning for it.
Anyone else?
I have a concern as well about not having a better sense of what would be constructed there. I mean, it's vague right now.
Which
And-
it'll be frequently with a zoning change.
Yeah, but it bothers me. And I think both we and the community should have a little bit better sense of what's going to happen. And because there's obviously some design questions that are going on. So I'm concerned about that, and particularly with not knowing who the owner is going to be, somebody may come in and want to change the zoning again. And so for that reason, I'm disturbed.
Okay. Anyone else?
Yeah, so my main objection is that it's in the middle of the block. And that, if we're looking at rezoning and kind of changing a transition to a specific area, I feel like that's a weird place to start. And then everything around it is not it's not copacetic. So that's my main objection. I think if we did, by right, if you did put 4 homes down there, that bisecting alleyway would be a very nice way to connect that in. And maybe 4 homes there is appropriate, as they can do by right. But yeah, rezoning in the middle of a block is not my favorite way to approach how to look at making developments in any particular neighborhood, regardless of if it's a R100 zone or SR zone or anything. So,
I'm just going to read the definition of spot zoning because we're hearing that as kind of a buzzword. The process of singling out a small parcel of land for a use classification materially different and inconsistent with the surrounding area and the adopted city master plan for the sole benefit of the owner of that property and to the detriment of the rights of other property owners. I think some of what stands out to me is that the differences that staff has pointed out between the two zoning definitions are not that material in my mind. So in my mind, I think there may be other reasons to, in my mind, I think there's not a lot of reason to deny this or to decide not to give it a positive recommendation, especially based on things we've approved in the past. But in this case especially, I don't think spot zoning is one of those reasons, just based on the definition of it in the code. And I wanted to, staff, you seem to have something you wanted to say, so I would like to invite you to say that.
You said exactly what I was going to say.
Oh,
so
okay.
I included the definition of spot zoning at the end of the presentation, just in the event that it came up, but you brought it up, so thank you.
Andres, I can tell you're
Well,
thinking.
I was just going to say, I am of the similar sentiment. I thank you for the definition as well of that word, spot zoning. It seems I wouldn't be opposed to this project. I mean, he can build 4 units by right. That's also nothing that I would be against either. It would be I agree with the previous comments. So thank you.
Did you have something, Brenda?
I do think it's a material difference in that doubling the number of units that are allowed on this site is materially different.
Any more discussion, questions?
I'm ready to make a motion.
A motion. Thank you.
Based on the information presented and the discussion, I move that the Planning Commission recommend that the City Council deny the zoning map amendment for the following reasons: that this rezoning is inconsistent with the surrounding zoning and is a material difference that may have an adverse effect on the neighborhood quality.
I'll second that.
Okay, I have a motion by Commissioner Scheer and a second by Commissioner Tuttle. Commissioner Paredes,
I'll vote yes.
Commissioner De Oliveira,
Yes.
Commissioner Scheer,
Yes.
Commissioner Berry,
Yes.
Commissioner Tuttle,
Yes.
Commissioner Gale,
No.
and the chair has some conflicts. The chair will vote no also. 1, 2, 3, 4. You have 5 yeses and 2 nos, so you'll go with a positive recommendation to the city council.
Sorry.
Those are the negative.
A negative recommendation to the city council. Sorry.
Yeah, regardless, we appreciate your time and consideration. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Need a break? Okay, we will take a 5-minute break between now and the next item. Sorry. I got some really pleading looks.
Aubrey's fault.
okay, let's.
Being hushed.
Yeah, quiet this down. We'll move on to the next item, which is the non-conforming signs text amendment, case number PLN PCM 2022-00984. Katie Lynn.
All right. So this one is pretty small text amendment, so we'll hopefully get through this quickly. That is not the right project. Whoops. That's awkward. Not again. There we go. That looks right. Okay. So the project request is to amend sections of 21A46, which is the signs chapter related to nonconforming signs. The proposed amendment is just generally to focus on bringing some of the sign standards in alignment with city goals, mostly to support businesses and also address any applicable state laws. We are recommending that you forward a positive recommendation to the City Council. So first up, what is a nonconforming sign? A nonconforming sign is simply a legally existing sign that at the time of its construction met all applicable zoning standards, but over time, either through zoning map amendments or text amendments, is no longer conforming with current sign standards in one way or another. That could be as like this one here, where pole signs are no longer permitted, so this is considered a nonconforming sign. Or it could be setbacks, it could be height, it could be a whole host of things that make it nonconforming. There are two types of nonconforming signs that are not going to be impacted by this text amendment. One of them is vintage signs. Vintage signs are signs that contribute to the historic or cultural character of a neighborhood, and there's a designation process outlined in the zoning code. And that process is not going to be impacted by the proposed text amendment. Also, billboards are non-conforming signs that are regulated separately as required by state code, and they're also not going to be impacted by this text amendment. So the current standard, or the current codes, are very restrictive. They don't allow for any kind of alterations or modifications, and they even have some pretty confusing language about what maintenance is allowed. State code requires that any non-complying structures be able to be reused, and since signs are considered a type of non-complying structure, we have to allow their reuse. But the way the current code is written, it is very, very challenging to reuse these signs under code. It goes so far as to limit the changing of the text or message of the sign. So, for example, this sign that's on 2100 South for a car wash has gone through owner changes a number of times over the past few years, and they've needed to change the owner's sign of who owns the car wash, and strictly applied the current code wouldn't allow them to change the advertising on those signs. We allowed those. This was a permitted sign change because we can't really enforce content. We can't regulate content, so we permitted their sign change, just the text of it. So the proposed code clarifies a lot of that. It allows any modifications that do not increase the level of nonconformity, or simply put, if it doesn't make the problem worse, it's a permitted modification or change. That can be any changes to dimensional standards, location, or even replacing parts of the sign. It also clarifies that site maintenance is permitted and also encouraged to kind of cut down on some of the poorly maintained signs that we see. It also adds some language about the removal of nonconforming signs. Clarifies that the sign face that's advertising a use, once that use is discontinued, the sign face needs to be taken down. The sign structure can remain on the property, but we have some language about when it is considered abandoned and should be removed. The main considerations with this one were Plan Salt Lake's economic goals to address barriers to economic development within the city's own organization. As you might be aware, signs are incredibly expensive. I looked at a valuation once that was reusing existing sign structure, and the valuation was still $20,000, and that's not constructing an entirely new sign. So not being able to reuse existing sign infrastructure can be an economic barrier to a lot of new businesses. Also, like I said, state laws requires the city to permit the reuse of non-complying structures. And this is shown in our actual non-conforming use and non-complying structures chapter, which is chapter 38. And that applies to all other non-complying structures besides signs. And the proposed modifications to non-conforming signs are consistent with the regulations in chapter 38, and they're designed to protect the existing development and reduce the impact of nonconformities on surrounding development. Like I said, we are recommending you forward a positive recommendation so that legally existing nonconforming signs can be better maintained and modified in certain circumstances to support the businesses that rely on them.
Any questions for Katie Lynn? Any discussion? Brenda?
Katie, yes, Katie. You have a letter from Scenic Utah in
Yes.
the packet here that objects to several issues with this particular modification. Can you address some of those issues?
Yeah, I included my response to their email in the packet with you guys. If I remember off the top of my head, one of the issues were with electronic changeable sign copy signs. Pretty much the way sign is defined in the code is it's the sign face and any structure associated with that sign. That's what a sign is called. And so calling electronic changeable copy a sign in that context means it could be its own sign type. But as we know, most electronic changeable copy, like the kinds that are on gas stations, the price for a gas station, that's electronic changeable copy. Or fast food joints that have specials, scrolling, or whatever. Those are part of a sign structure, not the sign structure or the sign its entire self. So that change was mainly just to clarify that electronic changeable copy isn't a sign type. It's something that can go on a sign type. So it can be on a pole sign, it could be on a monument sign. It's not its own specific sign type. Then the twirl time and dwell time, those regulations are found in the billboard section. There's no regulations concerning that kind of stuff in this sign ordinance as a whole. And since it's part of the billboard section, it's outside of the scope of this text amendment.
Isn't that something that might be desirable if we're making a text amendment to the sign ordinance?
Yeah, but it's beyond the scope of what we've been asked to amend. So we can't, even if we could explore it, but I don't know if we could include it in this one.
So
Who initiated that amendment so that we could know who's making the decision not to do this?
So hang on, let me get
Okay.
into some of the background on this.
Okay.
Several years ago, we actually did propose some changes to the city's sign regulations regarding animated signs. That included adding twirl time and things like that. That sign was not acted upon by the council. They decided not to take action on it. And so until that position changes, we're not really willing to go out and start that again. It was highly controversial when we were adding that. But technically, our sign code does not allow animation. So you can't have signs, even though we know they're out there, that either the twirl slower or have the I can't remember the other term right now, scroll and things like that. Yeah, that have movement on them, even electronic movement. Technically, those signs are not allowed by our code right now. They are addressed under the billboard code because of state law and federal law about billboards.
And technically, what's the difference between a billboard and a sign?
So a billboard is advertising a business event or something that's off premise.
Okay.
A sign is on the premise of that business.
Thank you. I believe the final, well, that was the one I was actually confused about, so I think that's fine. Thank you.
Okay.
Can you describe for me or point out a sign that represents Salt Lake City's heritage, character, or neighborhood or community kind of thing? I'm having a hard time grasping the concept that a sign can define a neighborhood or a,
Can you imagine 21st South?
I can.
So how about the Snell Grove's ice cream cones?
New Crisp.
Yeah, well, you know.
The furniture sign, the
Sputnik.
Kind of just sits out there
Sputnik
by
on the,
itself.
well, but those things, those were all businesses
I don't think that.
and they're historic.
Yeah, I don't think the Snell Grove sign has any truly historical significance.
Oh, the neighborhood would disagree with you
Wait,
vehemently on that.
is this why there is a black ice cream cone over the Jimmy John's down the street?
Correct. Well, that was prior to the ordinance change on vintage signs. That's what
Okay.
they ended up
Okay.
doing.
I
Bad
suspected
Jimmy
that,
John's.
but I think it's hilarious all the same. Well, we have the costume shop on 11.
Oh, yeah, my favorite one.
Yeah, lots of
Save that
things.
sign.
Hmm.
I'm ready to make
There's
them-
quite a few of them in Sugar House.
Yeah, after the meeting, I'll have a discussion with you about why Snell Groves is historically significant. We'll talk.
We'll go look at the black ice cream cone.
No, that's bad.
I don't like black ice cream. I'm ready to make a motion.
Don't we have to have a public hearing?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we do.
Sorry. Just kidding.
It's okay, we're all a little, yeah.
Punchy.
Any other
I'm ready
discussion?
anyway.
Any other discussion from the commission? Nope, okay. We will open the public hearing on this item. I have one card from Cindy Cromer. Be sure to introduce yourself.
Right. So some of you, oh my goodness, it's loud tonight. So some of you may have missed some finer points in sign ordinance history. There was Doug Dancy, who retired in 2019, who was the sign guru. I never attempted to figure out the complexities of the ordinance. I just called Doug, who could answer off the top of his head, no matter how complex it was. The longtime planning director, Vern Jorgensen, who was referred to by the staff as the czar, was committed to the removal of overhanging signs and awnings on Main Street. The result was a more sterile streetscape and greater difficulty locating businesses, one of the many insults to Main Street. I think an additional consideration in the proposal should be sustainability. No one is talking about how much building material is going to the dump in Salt Lake City. Repurposing an existing sign is likely to be labor intensive relative to the manufacture of a new sign, and that's good, because those are wages, and simultaneously conserve materials, which is also good. The mantra is, don't make something already non-conforming more so. And I think it's just one of those coincidences that Orion Goff walked in, because he has said that to me at a very critical moment, in fact. It is a good rule unless you're talking about inline additions, and then I don't think it's a good rule. Because I think you should make something more non-conforming in that case. But stick with the recommendation from staff in this case. Don't make something more non-conforming if it's already non-conforming. There's some notorious examples. You've already mentioned the Jimmy John signs. There was the Scenic Motel and Foothill where developers attempted to exploit the historic sign by radically altering it. And then there's Salt Lake Regional's inappropriate monument signs in the South Temple Historic District. Young Electric Signs should have known better, but obviously the city employee who approved the signs did not. So that leads me to my wrap-up, which is that we are really going to need some training for all city employees involved in permitting signs once the new ordinance is adopted. It is absolutely essential that everybody be on the same page and be as accurate as Doug Dancy was. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else in the audience wish to speak on this item? Seeing none, I will close the public hearing and bring it back to the commission. Now you can make a motion.
Okay. Based on the information presented and discussion, I move that the commission recommend that the city council approve this zoning map amendment proposal. zoning map amendment proposal.
Zoning text amendment, isn't it?
Text amendment, yes, sorry, it's typed wrong on the motion sheet.
Oh.
So, based on
that.
information presented and discussion, I move that the commission recommend that the city council, that's part still correct, right? Approve this non-conforming signs text amendment.
I'll second.
Okay, I have a motion by Commissioner Gale and a second by Commissioner Scheer. Commissioner Gale,
Yes.
Commissioner Tuttle,
Yes.
Commissioner Barry,
Yes.
Commissioner Scheer,
Yes.
Commissioner De Oliveira.
Yes.
Commissioner Paredes.
I'll vote yes.
And the chair will also vote yes. So you can take it to the commission.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, that closes the public hearing portion of the meeting. And we have some work sessions. So the first one is affordable housing incentives, PLN PCM 2019-00658. Welcome, Sarah.
So, thank you, Chair. We're here to talk this evening for a second work session on the affordable housing incentives. So this evening, what I wanted to do was to finish going over the responses to the questions from the last Planning Commission hearing last May, and then also talk about the additional modifications to the proposal that staff has made, and then allow some time for discussion. Just to summarize, last week we just had an overview of the proposal. I gave a few examples of how it could apply in different areas of the city. Also talked about the staff's efforts since May of 2022, including working on development scenarios with local developers and the focus group and their recommendations, and then started going over the responses to the questions from the Planning Commission from last May. And I do have those slides in this presentation if you have any additional questions from that. So getting started on the remainder of the questions, how will the incentives be enforced? We have added a number of details regarding enforcement to the draft incentives. First of all, we've increased the fines that could apply. There is an existing $100 fine per day that can apply, and there'll be another fine added just for the affordable housing incentives to the consolidated fee schedule. And this fine will be updated annually with the update of that document. There is also an additional fine that can apply. That's the difference between the agreed upon affordable housing rate and the market rate of the unit. And as far as non-compliance, once the fines total $5,000 or it has been at least 90 days, a lien can be placed on the property for those fines. And in addition to that, the business license that's associated with the property can be revoked, and then other persons who are associated with that individual cannot be granted a license for that property for 6 months after that license is revoked. As far as administration, there were a number of comments regarding how the city would administer the incentives. So we've added some details just briefly. As with before, there is a restrictive covenant that will be recorded on the property. That's also the same as a deed restriction. The city will have administrative guidelines and regulations. There is additional language regarding annual reporting in the document, and it also provides for developers to be able to submit reports that are required for other funding sources, like the low-income housing tax credits, and they can use those reports for the city incentives. Additionally, the city may contract with a third party for review of these annual reports. And just to go in a little bit more details, for the restrictive covenant, it will be in effect for 30 years, and it does transfer to new owners. As far as affordable home ownership units, there will be administrative requirements that will set a maximum sales price annually and the city will have the first option on any resale. And owners will need to meet income requirements at the time of purchase. For affordable rental units, the monthly rent, including costs, shall not exceed the rate that's set by the Utah Housing Corporation annually, and there are the administrator for low-income housing tax credits. And these administrative requirements will also address what will occur if a tenant's income increases. The idea here is to do a variation on what is in effect for low-income housing tax credit projects, where if a tenant's income increases to a certain amount, that they are moved to a market rate unit. And with these incentives, they're likely to be smaller projects, and so we recognize that it may take some time for a market rate unit to open up, and we want to accommodate for that. As far as how the incentives will affect city infrastructure, a lot of this came up and dealt with the city's water supply, also water and sewer lines, and then how it would relate to streets. As is currently the practice, new development must provide the necessary improvements, and this usually depends upon the size and the scope of the development. So for example, depending on a smaller project, they may need to replace a lateral, and then larger projects may need to upsize a main or provide other infrastructure improvements. We had a number of comments on the city's water supply and how the proposed incentives and any growth might affect that. We discussed this with the city's Public Utilities Department, and they have an existing 2019 water supply and demand master plan. And this master plan does address the additional infill development that may occur in the community and also in the Northwest Quadrant. It is a 5-year plan, and the Public Utilities Department is planning an update to it this year. The plan includes different demand scenarios that account for development through 2060, and generally it emphasizes system conservation. We also discussed with the Public Utilities water usage and the differences between some existing single-family home development and the types of development that we would expect with these incentives. So for example, over the past few years, single-family residential usage has averaged approximately 12,000 to 15,000 gallons per month. Generally, this usage is higher in the summer with outdoor watering and then decreases in the winter. We wanted to see how this could compare to multifamily construction, and so we requested some information on different multifamily buildings. And these multifamily buildings, there are about 700 units total in these 5 buildings. They averaged about 2,000 gallons per month per unit. And then we also, asked for some information on some fourplex and cottage courts developments to look at their water usage. And these used approximately 3,000 gallons per month per unit, so a little bit more likely depending on the building coverage for the site. I think it's important to consider that this multifamily development likely has smaller household sizes. And then Public Utilities also noted that multifamily development has more consistent year-round water usage compared to single-family homes, and that there are also different hardscape impacts with multifamily development compared to single-family development. So moving on to the 6th question, as far as housing vouchers. Utah State Code does prohibit discriminatory practices in renting, including based on source of income, which includes housing vouchers. And so based on this, zoning is not a suitable tool to incentivize private property owners to accept vouchers, since it is already required by state law that they accept these tenants. The next question is, what is the effect of having administrative design review or waiving plan development requirements? And so these are 2 different planning processes. The first, design review. Many design review projects right now are reviewed with a planning commission process rather than administratively. And so the proposal with the affordable housing incentives would allow for an administrative process rather than that planning commission process. And this would result roughly in about half of the review time. Generally, staff tells applicants that the process would take about 4 to 6 months with a planning commission hearing. And if it is an administrative process, it would be subject to the same design review standards in 21A59. And then somewhat differently, we do have a few provisions in the draft incentives where the plan development requirement would be waived. And so in these cases, there would not be a plan development required. The project could likely proceed to building permits. And there are 3 different cases where we're providing for that. The first is with multiple buildings on a parcel without street frontage. And then similarly, a principal building with frontage on a paved public alley, or then if that principal building had frontage on a private street. And the reasons behind these are that they may enable development that may not otherwise occur, and similarly may enable more affordable units to be constructed. Generally, developers may not like to be under contract for a long period of time, and the same goes for property owners. And so by decreasing these review times, it would decrease their timeline as well. There were some questions regarding parking, so we did find some numbers for that. One thing that I think is important to consider is there's the size of the parking stall itself, and then there's also the area that needs to be included as well for a drive aisle or other areas. And so surface parking is generally less than $10,000 per stall, and then structured parking, depending on what type it is and whether there are units above it or if it's underground, it can be between $20,000 and $40,000 per stall. There was a question last time, and I also noted in my memo, several other cities and how they have implemented incentives for housing and allowed for other housing types. So I wanted to go ahead and just touch on 2 of these tonight. The first would be Los Angeles' transit-oriented communities, and then the second is Portland, Oregon's residential infill project. The first one has to do with multifamily buildings for the most part, and then the second looks at those middle housing types. So I thought those would be 2 good ones to talk about. The first one, LA's transit-oriented communities. It encourages construction near bus and train station and has different tiers of development based on proximity to those transit types and the type of transit. It does have a different percentage of units that's required for different AMI levels, and then a greater percentage of units is required the closer it is to transit. So just for example, depending on how close you are to transit, for a 30% AMI unit, they would need to provide 8 to 11% of those units at that AMI. They have a number of different incentives that they offer. These include increased density, floor area ratio, reductions in parking, reductions in yards and setbacks, an increase in height and lot coverage. The program has produced a number of units for about 5 years. There were 37,000 units, and about 20% of these, or 7,400 of them, were affordable. Then the second group of incentives that I wanted to talk about was Portland, Oregon's residential infill project. This was adopted in 2021, and then there were some modifications to it in 2022 based on some state law requirements, which I also highlighted in the memo. In the residential infill project, they allow, without an affordability requirement, duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes in zoning districts, and then they've also modified ADU requirements. One of the things that I think relates this one to what's proposed is they do have a deeper affordability bonus for up to 6 units when half of the units are affordable at 60% AMI. They have received 1 application for this deeper affordability bonus, but generally they thought it would be something that a nonprofit would do rather than a private developer. And then total for these residential infill incentives, they've received 86 applications for a total of 367 units in their first year. So I wanted to move on and talk about a few other changes that are proposed compared to what was in the incentives last May. These are the consistency with the downtown building heights text amendment, addressing some concerns with landscaping in commercial districts, and then talking about some housekeeping and clarifying changes, as well as some changes in the residential zones. So the downtown building heights text amendment has been transmitted to the City Council, but not adopted. One of the recommendations in it is to remove the requirement for a plan development in the GMU zone, so that was removed from this proposal as well. There are some height changes in the CG or general commercial zoning district. They're allowing for additional height, and so we're accommodating for that as well and allowing for that additional height with an administrative design review process. And then also in the CG zoning district, there is a depot district, which this project will remove the map we had and apply that one, and also allow for additional height with administrative design review. And then similarly, the height in the D3 zoning district increased, and the height in this proposal increases along with that. The previous proposal last May did not require additional landscaping in the CG and CC zoning districts if they were using the incentives. And this proposal we've changed with this new proposal to require that additional landscaping. In the CG zoning district, it's accommodated with that downtown building heights text amendment. And so we're just using that language. And then in the CC, our corridor commercial zoning district, we're applying similar language in the affordable housing incentives where it can be used not just in landscaped yards, but also in amenity areas that aren't necessarily at grade. And then a few changes to residential zoning districts that I wanted to highlight are some to make it consistent with the RMF 30 zoning changes that have been adopted, to allow for additional height in RMU 35 and RMU 45 when it's abutting a single or two-family zone, and then to not require the RB density limitation to apply. And then in the single and two-family zoning districts, removing the ability for SR3 height to increase, and then for parking on single and two-family zones, allowing for covered parking, basically so that each unit, if you had a fourplex, could have a detached covered parking space. Clarifying that units may be on their own lot in these zoning districts, and also that an ADU counts to one of the 4 units that's permitted on the property. And so that is most of what I wanted to discuss for tonight. There is a Historic Landmark Commission work session next week. The Planning Commission hearing is tentatively scheduled for April 26th. And then following a recommendation from Planning Commission, it would be transmitted to City Council. So are there questions or comments? And then also, if there are any questions about the pro formas that were developed by Cowboy Partners, Chris Zarek is here if you wanted to ask any questions.
Sarah, can you just take it back a few slides again? One more. I wanted to read that again.
Okay.
So I guess one of the questions that I have is that this entire presentation is assumes that we know what the original proposal is. And I'm sure that most of us do not. Anybody remember the original proposal? Anybody at all? Okay.
Well,
so,
I remember the questions we asked.
Huh?
I remember the discussion and the concerns we brought
I
up.
remember that these are the questions that we asked, but I don't remember what exactly was in the original proposal. So it's very difficult for me to evaluate this, and I'm hoping that, and so I guess one of the questions that I had was the same question I had last week was, do we actually understand what order of magnitude we might have in terms of the difference in what's being built now and what might be built under the affordable housing incentives in terms of more affordable units. And that answer to that question is going to depend on how much of an incentive this actually is for housing developers. And by that I mean financial incentive, obviously, because that's the one that counts. I'm generally not in favor of very elaborate changes like this one, unless it's very clear that this is something that developers are chomping at the bit to do, that they're ready and willing, that they've got in their back pocket a number of units that they would do if this were available to do. I mean, if you go to all this trouble and you get 2 applications over, or four applications, then I think we failed to provide affordable housing incentives. And we have to look at other kinds of incentives, not zoning ones.
Commissioner
And
Scheer? I'm sorry. Would this be a good time to invite Cowboy Partners up, because they are a current developer, to get their feedback to that kind of a question?
We can certainly do that.
I didn't mean to interrupt you. I thought you were concluding, so I apologize.
It's okay. Chris, you want to come up and talk?
Introduce yourself for the record. Thank you.
My name is Chris Zarek. I'm a developer with Cowboy Partners. We do market and affordable housing development, and we also manage all of our properties as well. So we do a lot of property management for affordable communities, and we're fairly familiar with all of the compliance that goes along with that. Thank you, Commissioner Scheer, for your question. I don't know that I necessarily have a satisfactory answer, because the answer is going to be yes and no. I think the incentive will certainly lead to additional affordable units. It's not a panacea, right? It's affordable housing is, winning the war on affordable housing is something that will require a plethora of tools, and we have a lot of tools. And so this is certainly one that is going to help us deliver additional units, given the specific context of a project. My guess is that early in the life of this incentive overlay, if it is approved, it will be slow going. And that's for 2 reasons. One, the market rate development is not very attractive right now, because of the economic environment and the interest rate environment. So having additional units, the payoff on those additional market rate units may not justify the return on the affordable housing units. However, Cowboy or other affordable housing developers who are already doing affordable housing developments, where we have the opportunity to utilize the fact that we're already doing affordable housing, this gives us the opportunity to do additional density in some of those places. And that is actually a really critical tool that we can use, because right now affordable housing developers tend to target specific sites that they know are going to score well when it comes to getting subsidies, like 9% tax credits specifically. And having the opportunity to add an additional floor or add an additional 2 floors, I do know that there's a limit to the number of units where you could be all affordable. But in those instances, this is the way that we as a city can help direct limited subsidies to our city and to our neighborhoods. If we have a site that is well suited for affordable housing development and for 9% tax credits, meets all of the different things that we as a state have said are attractive or useful in affordable housing development, well, we're able to produce more units there. And so in the initial time period of this incentive, I think those are likely the additional units that you'll see.
So would it make sense, and I'm asking both of you now, to actually limit these incentives to those projects?
I don't think so, and this is why. I think the cycle will turn. Eventually the rates are going to come down, construction costs will start to compress because people won't have any projects any longer. And there will come a point where the economics start to turn a little bit. And as the city, we all understand that Salt Lake City is landlocked, and at some point we have to build higher, build more density. As the city matures and the margin and the rents on market rate projects continue to escalate, it stands to reason that the return on those market rate units are going to justify the additional affordable rate projects. And so I think over time, the economics of this incentive to market rate developers are going to improve, both because of where we might be in the economic cycle, but where we are as a city and in its build out.
So I'm sorry, if anybody else has a question, they can jump right in here. Do you think that the administrative burdens that are being proposed under these incentives would be a disincentive to developers to take advantage of this program for density?
Well, and that might be another, I mean, certainly for affordable housing developers, no. You know, there's nothing in here that's any more onerous than what we're already doing. And likely, I think part of the incentive, the compliance that we're doing for HUD or for Utah Housing Corporation will stand for the compliance that we might have to do for the city. That's the part of it that market rate developers who only do market rate developments are probably going to need to get their heads around. But as they do, you know, right now there are a whole class of developers who build projects intending to rent them up and sell them. And for those developers, affordable housing development like we do is not a good option. If you're going out and getting tax credits, your tax credit investor doesn't want you to sell for 15 years or longer. And so those developers just tend to stay away from it. If they have an option where they can do affordable units that don't require these subsidies at a lower level, 5 or 10% of the project instead of 20 or 40%, that have, you know, limited compliance, that becomes something that is a little more approachable to them once they get over their initial fear, and there will be initial fear. But that opens up affordable housing development to those types of developers.
Thank you very much.
Anyone else? Amy?
Well, I just have a discussion point, and not for you, but I wanted to tie back to like the questions about water usage, because last year at the APA conference, and I brought this up in one of our discussion points, and I hope it's still on the list of potential education topics for us, was the Jordan Valley Conservancy District had some pretty good stats on looking, but now I have to pull out of my memory, but looking at the difference between like single family homes and multi-family developments. And it consistently showed that, and it used a lot of different complex ways to look at the water usage, but overall, the single family home was actually consuming more water for various reasons, but I can't remember all of them. And so I think this issue of water supply is really complex, and I wanted to get more information based on that presentation last year to really understand the recharge rates and how those are being used in those calculations, and the capture rates, which somewhat disturbs me, but that's what I wanted to learn more about. And so I think as maybe we move forward too, it's just an opportunity when these, you know, how much our water supply is something that comes up all the time, no matter what's being built, that we look at ways in which to better calculate or to better communicate that calculation, because I mean, we're seeing more water usage with single-family homes than multifamily homes for a variety of reasons. And so I think that might be something to look at, maybe not necessarily for this initiative, but in the future as we calculate those things. And hopefully that is a discussion item that will come up in one of our education topics.
Yeah, it will. One thing that occurred at the state legislature last year, I believe, is that they passed a law that says cities have to include as part of their general plan water conservation plan. We have a water conservation plan, and Sarah mentioned that, and Public Utilities is going through a process to update that right now. So because that's part of the general plan, the Planning Commission has a role in that. So we'll be, as that gets closer to through the process and they have more information to present,
Will the water conservation plan include an education item to like help us understand those different rates? Okay.
That's what I was going to say, is that we will have them, we'll work with Public Utilities to have them come and not just present the plan when it's done, but give you some educational opportunities and knowledge behind it so you can make an informed recommendation to the
It's complicated. It's very complex beyond what even I had really considered. So, yeah, I think, water usage is a huge issue, but it shouldn't be a detrimental one to like doing affordable housing and increasing our density and ability to house people. So, Sarah, I also wanted to ask you, based on those, the 1 point in additional heights in RMU 35 and RMU 45, is it abuts single and double family homes? Where do we have RMU zones typically? Where are we seeing those in the city?
There is kind of a small concentration of them on 900 West. I think between north of 13th South, I think. And then otherwise, there have been some properties that have rezoned to RMU 35 or RMU 45, often near RMF properties. That's where they're most common. They're not mapped in a large area in the city. And so what this is so the RMU 35, if you go through a design review process, you're able to go up to 45 feet. And then with RMU 45, it has that same process where you can go from RMU 40, you can go have a height of 45 feet to a height of 55 feet. But you can't do that if the properties abut a single or two family zone. And so this would allow for that extra 10 feet of height when you are abutting a single or two family zoning district.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Thank you, Sarah. There's a lot of work involved in that. And thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And we'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Oh, wait, I have one last question then. If we're sorry.
Amy.
I know, I'm horrible.
Amy.
So last week I brought up the issue of really addressing the ability to incentivize in single family homes. And Nick, you brought up an option to do some various different things in that to make it more of an incentive. Is that something that you'll include then in the April 26th meeting?
I'm trying to remember the details.
So
of that.
I
We'll
made
have
the
to go
comment
back
that if we're looking at building a secondary unit, that if I was going to do the math and I was a single family homeowner and I was going to build a secondary unit, it would probably be more economical for me to build a smaller unit, which would be cheaper, and rent it for market rate versus build a slightly bigger unit and then rent restricted. And you had made the comment there may be ways to include you would take a basement apartment, a mother-in-law apartment, and kind of mix it up to make that incentive to actually do some affordable housing in those zones to be more attractive.
And I think that is in the proposal now.
It wasn't in it last week.
No, I think it is. I just don't think that it specifically mentioned that, but because what I was trying to explain is that because in those zones you can have up to 4 units, you have options in how those 4 unit and building types are arranged. So the one thing that maybe wasn't as specifically in there was that one of those 4 units could potentially be an ADU, where you could do that, and then you could have maybe your affordable unit in the basement type of thing and meet the requirements. So it's in there. It's just maybe, I think we wanted to clarify that if somebody wanted to use ADUs as part of this, it's not in addition to the 4 units. It's one of those 4 units, so it could potentially be utilized.
Okay, because I think one of the criticisms that I was going on last week too was that the incentives to really promote affordable housing in the SR zones isn't as attractive as the other zones, and that's an equity issue for me as well, as to provide in all of our zones. And so
part of that is because in the SR zones you can already have 2 units, and so it's already 2 units basically in the same scale as an R1 zone, and so it already has a by right that makes it harder to get more incentives and not be increase the scale and development characteristics to a point that starts to maybe tip the impacts more negatively. So that's part of just the nature of that zone. And there, like SR3 is probably the same way, because you can already do a lot of those units and a lot of those housing types already. So some of those are just going to have that reality in them.
okay, thanks. I'm really done this time.
You're sure? Okay. Thank you, Sarah. So we'll move to the next item of Housing SLC. Rudy, welcome.
Glad to be here. I'm on earlier than I was last time I presented. I think I started at 9:45 last time. So we're already in a
Some
good...
days you're lucky.
We're already in a good position. Okay. So thanks for having me back so soon. And I really want to make this a presentation. I'll be quick on my end so that I can hear from you all your thoughts on what's been presented. So this is Housing SLC. It's open for public comment right now. The comment period will close on April 16th, after which time we'll consolidate those comments and then bring it back for a public hearing scheduled for the 26th of April. So there are 3 goals, which I'll go over real quickly because we went over those last time, but just wanted to refresh your memories. And those goals are supported by 18 moderate income housing strategies as outlined in state code. And those are then supported by 44 unique action items, which will be implemented over 5 years. The action items include things like land use and zoning, programs, policies, funding, and collaborations. And tonight we're going to focus on the land use and zoning ones that are most in your wheelhouse. So goal 1 is make progress toward closing the housing gap of 5,500 units of deeply affordable housing and increase the supply of housing at all levels of affordability while reducing overall water use and improving air quality. The metrics over the next 5 years would be to entitle 10,000 new units throughout the city, a minimum of 2,000 of those units being deeply affordable, available to people, or households earning 30% AMI or below, and a minimum of 2,000 units affordable to households earning 31 to 80% AMI. Goal 2, increase housing stability throughout the city. As I mentioned last time, the data that does exist is kind of not always great, and so we're hoping to acquire better data and begin tracking and analyzing a little bit better so that we can really monitor how these programs are impacting the households that they're serving. And then we want to increase the programs, both the number of programs and also the number of people served, to at least 10,000 low-income individuals annually through housing stability programs funded by the city. Those could be, direct service programs that the city offers or through partners. And then dedicate targeted funding to mitigate displacement, serve renter households, serve family households, and increase geographic equity. And goal 3, increase opportunities for home ownership and other wealth and equity building opportunities. And we want to help a minimum of 1,000 low-income households enter into home ownership and or other wealth or equity building opportunities over the next 5 years. As we see home ownership gap, it's harder and harder for households to become home-owning households. So now I'll jump into the action items that maybe are most pertinent to you all. There's 2 on each slide, so I'll touch base on it. And I'm actually going to start with the affordable housing incentives because that's we just heard about. So again, the intent is to increase density and affordable housing stock in context-appropriate ways. The timeline would be proposed to adopt the ordinance in 2024, working through that with council and all of that. And the community benefits policy, which is something that has not been started yet, as far as I know, maybe planning has already got it in their heads, but the intent would be to establish a set list of community benefits offered in exchange for increased development capacity. So whereas affordable housing incentives covers some of the by right land uses, the community benefits policy would be triggered with zoning map amendments or rezones. And one of the things that, and this kind of goes hand in hand with the Thriving in Place initiative, but one of the things that we'd like to do is to have kind of, if we're going to be offering increased development capacity to a project, we would like to get something in return for that. And while we would probably focus in my shop on the housing side of things and getting more affordability for that, that would not be limited to housing, because there are different community benefits that we'd like to see, such as open space, affordable retail space, things like that. So that would be the community benefits policy, and adopt a policy, kind of develop and adopt, hopefully sometime in 2024 is what we would present. The next items are also somewhat similar in that they kind of are reuse options. So hotel and motel conversions. So this would be, the intent of this would be to increase the stock of deeply affordable and transitional housing, of which we're in short supply. And this is already being done or has been done. The city, even as recently as last, I think it was November, approved $6 million for projects, and that'll be coming online this year. So this is something that has been shown to be effective at producing deeply affordable and transition housing, and so it's something we'd like to continue doing, but do it in a more, maybe, I don't want to say that the last stuff wasn't strategic, but kind of map it out a little bit more and really plan for it and kind of bring those things online. So kind of developing and funding and or incentives, selecting priority sites, working with partners, identifying land use barriers, and then later on in the 5 years, purchasing and converting those properties through partners. The adaptive reuse ordinance, intent to preserve historic structures while also increasing the housing stock, especially the affordable housing stock. Also looking at 2024, a lot of this stuff would be kind of earlier on in the 5-year process, and then we'd monitor the results of that over time and report those back to the state. Tiny home development. We want to increase the stock of deeply affordable and transition housing, and tiny homes at least serve that potential and have been utilized elsewhere in the country. While we don't have an example yet of that being online. We're moving forward with the Other Side Village project that will kind of be a pilot program in Utah, in Salt Lake City, and we'd like to kind of convene a working group and identify building code and land use barriers early on so that we can figure out how we can do more of it to provide affordable ways of creating that deeply affordable housing that's so desperately needed. The working group would draft policy recommendations in 2024, and then with the idea of working through those and all of that process and implementing in 2027. The Transfer of Development Rights program, this is the intent would be to preserve existing affordable housing while increasing development capacity in other parts of the city. And Utah already allows for TDR programs, and typically they're used for kind of agriculture or open space. But we'd like to at least pursue, this is more of an exploratory item here, is to explore the feasibility of what such a program could look like for affordable housing in the city in order to preserve existing housing stock in perpetuity as affordable while allowing for increased housing units to be brought online elsewhere. So, starting with the research of best practices, developing policy frameworks, and then finally adoption kind of on the back end of the housing plan. And finally, the last item that I want to go over today is just increased density limits where compatible with other uses, with other neighborhood characteristics. Especially along transit and other amenity-rich areas, allowing for increased affordability for households. And so, one of the things that, while increasing density is helpful because it brings more housing online, the focus on amenity and transit-rich areas also helps reduce housing costs if done right, because transportation is typically the second largest expense on a household budget. So if we can get people living closer to transit, but also closer to amenities that they need and utilize regularly, then they don't have to spend as much on transportation to get to and from places, and don't have to spend as much on maybe childcare because they're closer to things that exist, or maybe childcare is in their neighborhood. So really trying to create that 15-minute city through the increased density piece, and would think through this and transmit potential zoning ordinance changes to City Council in 2024 with monitored response to those changes starting in 2025 and ongoing. The next steps, so I just remind that we started the 45-day public comment period on March 2nd. On March 29th, that's today, I'm giving you the second briefing. And then April 16th is the end of the 45-day public comment period. April 26th, I'll be back for the Planning Commission public hearing. And then, depending on your recommendation, I'm hoping it's favorable, we'd move through the City Council adoption process with the goal of having the plan adopted by June 30th or earlier, so that we can submit it to the state and not have a gap in our housing plans. And that's all I have, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have and receive any feedback from you that you have.
Questions for Rudy?
Mine's not much of a question, maybe just a comment. I still fail to see where equity is going to be enforced somehow. I was strongly opposed to the Other Side Village for many, many reasons. Love the idea, I think it's great. I don't like where it was built. I think the public was misled. We were taught to believe that it was going to be built on top of a landfill. Couldn't be further from the truth. It is not being built on top of a former landfill. It's being built on land that the city could have built other things for the neighborhood. And anyway, yeah, that's just my comment, my issue, and it's something that I hear over and over and over in my neighborhood, that it's just the city gonna figure out a way to put more low-income development in a area that can't handle it anymore. Thanks.
Boy, I really second that. I think that all of the policies ought to be looking at equity in terms of especially where density is increased, where affordable housing is built, and that really ought to be part of the Salt Lake City housing policy headline.
And if I may add just one thing to that, I would love, I've heard before that there isn't land available on the east side. I do not believe that. I would love to see a map of every city-owned property east of State Street. I would love to see that. And then say, how come we are not putting extremely low affordable, I want houses for nearly free built in those areas, just like we're building tiny home villages and studio apartments and converting hotels and motels into deeply affordable housing. I think that's a fair ask. I would love for my fellow commissioners to remind me how this is not fair.
No, I echo those sentiments. Commissioner De Oliveira, he makes a very good case, and I think those points should be addressed before they become part of the public comment, if you know what I mean. Because people will start to notice, I think, sooner or later, that this is kind of an issue that should have been looked at, and maybe we should start looking at it now, I would think. Yeah, very good point.
I guess I
Anyone
have one
else?
other comment too, which is, wait, did I just forget it? Did it just go right out of my head? Because that one was so important. I just,
We'll give you
okay,
a moment.
Give me a sec.
Well, I want to say it's obvious the amount of work that's gone into this, and I don't know that this is true, but it seems like you have a certain commitment and passion for this work, and that's very much appreciated, because I don't think that there would be everybody in your place that has that level of commitment and excitement, and I really appreciate your individual work and your team's work on this. It's very, very good. There are always going to be imperfections, but thank you.
Thank you.
I remembered.
Okay.
Okay, there are several of your action strategies which are in conflict with each other. And so I think that, for example, preserving historic buildings and increasing increasing density, or increasing density on the one hand, and the affordable housing incentives, which that's one of the incentives, that is the incentive, is to increase density. So if you increase density everywhere, then where does the affordable housing incentive go? So I think you need to address those inherent conflicts in these strategies, which are, sort of working at odds with each other.
Do you mean in this internal, or do you mean between like the affordable housing plan and this plan? Like,
No, this
one
plan includes the
internal?
affordable housing plan.
okay, right.
So what I mean is that if his plan, one of the things is to increase density where it's appropriate. Well, if we increase density where it's appropriate, then are we undercutting the affordable housing incentives?
No, I appreciate that feedback. And I think looking at, taking a fine look at all of the strategies and seeing where they may be in conflict and opposition, because certainly the intent is not to undermine one strategy with another. Rather, the idea would be to layer so that one strategy magnifies the other. So I think that's a point well taken. So I can go back and look at those.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Good job, Rudy. Thank you.
Thank you.
Actually,
And
can I make a comment on some of that?
Sure.
Maybe add some context and some examples. So one thing that, on that last comment about increasing densities without jeopardizing the ability for the incentives to work, which is a very valid point and something that we're doing. But one project that we're working on internally that will become public very, very shortly is the zoning amendments around the ballpark, within the ballpark station area plan, which does call for increasing density, but also trying to do it in a way that we can promote more affordable housing. And so one of the things that we'll be looking at as part of that is we won't necessarily take the approach that we've taken around other transit stations where we've just blown up the zoning to whatever. We'll probably limit it intentionally so that the incentives do have an opportunity to work. That may not be in the entire station area, but in good portions of it. And so I just wanted to bring that up as an example of how maybe that could work. The other with the adaptive reuse and increasing density, part of that may be something like allowing density bonuses within a historic building or on a historic property that has room for new construction. And that aligns well also with the transfer of development rights, which I think internally we've looked at as almost a phase 2 of the affordable housing incentives, where if we can figure out how to do it, where somebody could potentially agree to preserve existing affordable units anywhere for a period of time, and then that could count for somebody being able to use the incentive somewhere else without having to meet the affordable housing requirement in that project. So it's kind of a trade-off type of thing. There's also the option of where if when you come up with both sending and receiving areas for a transfer of development, that maybe you give more a density bonus in that receiving area if there's some units that are affordable. So I think there's ways to do it.
Or if that receiving area is on the east side of town.
Exactly, and that gets to some of the equity stuff. And so that's kind of what we're looking at. Those are going to be big challenges, there's no doubt. But it's a big issue, and it needs to big solutions in order to address it. So
Yeah, so that's like the, what you do, I know you do that in the Sugar House, where you've had certain projects that could transfer the apartments and just build the height with office and transfer it, but it was within a specific
it's within
geographic
the same
area.
district, yeah.
So this would allow you to expand that and direct that. Could you?
That's the thought. I mean,
Yeah.
these are very high level things. There's no detail behind any of this.
No, I think that's
So-
that's a great way to do it. And if maybe even thinking about like requiring that it goes here, not just saying like it could go, and to transfer that to make it more equitable throughout the city.
Right,
To
and
be like, these are our target zones of where we want to see that transferred, and
that's
do it.
exactly how that would work, is that
Yeah.
it would be a receiving area that is that target zone for that.
Okay.
And just one last thing for the record, I just want to remind everyone, right? The issue of, well, would developers want to build affordable housing on the east side because the cost of land is so high? Let's remember how much the city charged for the 45 acres that was made available to the other side village. Does anyone remember how much that's going to cost them? Correct if I'm wrong, is it a whopping $1 a year for 40 years? $1 a year. I think if the city were to allocate land on the east side and say $1 a year for however many years, I think we're not going to see a shortage of developers willing to build deeply affordable housing there.
Thank you. I just wanted to add some, I guess, meat to the discussion. I'm good, yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your time. Yeah.
Okay, we'll move on to the final item, updates to policies and procedures. This is, okay, but I don't think so. Yeah, just barely, but we don't have to vote on anything. I don't know. Some days I just don't know. It's Aubrey on the other side.
I'm on the other side. Look at that. Yay. Good evening, everybody. We're here to review the changes to the policies and procedures. Many of you were here for the Planning Commission retreat on January 18th, where we had discussed changing to a new consent agenda. So I just wanted to go over a few of these changes with you, and if anybody has some comments, you're welcome to provide those, and let's just get into it. The first thing I did want to go over was that we, based on the recommendation of attorneys, that we change the Planning Commission discussion to be now called open forum, as a way to be more transparent with the public about what's happening on our agenda. So that's been added to your policies and procedures. And you can see that here. We've added a little blurb about what that is. And then with the consent agenda, we've reviewed that with city attorneys and made that compatible with our city and state codes, so that items that require a public hearing will still receive a public hearing. And it should go towards eliminating staff and application presentation and streamlining our meetings, and making them a little easier for all of us to get through. And do we have any questions on these changes?
I think they're okay, but I'm going to need a cheat sheet for for a few
I definitely
weeks.
will put together a cheat sheet for you. We'll make it nice and seamless. You know, I've got you there. So the items that will be moved to the consent agenda are those that are recommended by staff for approval, and these will be administrative items only. They will not have received negative feedback from the public up to the day of the meeting. So we will open a public hearing, and you could possibly receive negative feedback during that public hearing, at which point you would be able to move the item back onto the regular agenda if you want to hear more. And the commission will be allotted input should they choose to do that during that consent agenda time. If they feel that the item needs to be moved, they are able to portray that to the rest of the commission. Any other questions? And tonight we can consider adoption or edits.
I'll make a motion that we adopt the changes in the policies and procedures for the Salt Lake City Planning Commission.
I'll second.
Okay, I have a motion from Commissioner Gale and a second from Amy, Commissioner Barry. Let's see. Huh? Are you just confusing me? Okay. Commissioner Paredes.
I'll vote yes.
Commissioner Oliveira had to leave. Commissioner Shearer.
Yes.
Commissioner Barry.
Yes.
Commissioner Tuttle.
Yes.
Commissioner Gale.
Yes.
And the chair will vote yes. So
Thank you.
You got unanimous approval.
Move to adjourn.
Nice and succinct. So thank you all for coming tonight. We're adjourning this meeting. Thank you.